So this is just a quick run through of another practice paper for paper 1. So the first question says, Brian is building a desktop computer system using various pieces of hardware. He purchases a dual core CPU which features von Neumann architecture. State one characteristic of the von Neumann architecture. So for this question here, all we really need to say is that the von Neumann architecture has data and instructions stored together in memory. And that's a very simple 1-mark question. So next question. So explain with reference to memory and specific registers the steps of the CPU fetch execute cycle. So here you need to be talking about the memory data register, the memory address register, and how their role in the fetch decode execute cycle. And you'll also need to talk about the control unit as well, and reference to the memory. So the way data moves in and out of memory and how instructions are processed. So you only need 4 points on this question in order to get the 4 marks. So a memory address is copied from the program counter to the memory address register. So that's 1 mark. The data or instructions at that address is copied to the memory data register. The program counter is then increased by 1 to point to the next instruction. That gets you another mark. And the control unit then decodes the instructions. So that's where it makes sense of it. And the instruction is executed. Okay. So that's already enough. But you could then say, if you haven't got enough for the other points, you could just say the cycle restarts using the new instruction in the program counter. So the whole cycle starts again. It fetches, it decodes, and it executes. So Brian's computer will have both RAM and ROM. Explain 2 differences between RAM and ROM. So here we just need to talk about the fact that RAM is volatile, which means you take all the electricity away and it loses its content, whereas ROM is non-volatile, which means it retains its data even when you turn the computer off and there's no electricity anymore. You can also say that RAM is read-only memory and ROM is read-only memory and RAM is read and write memory. Okay, so RAM is volatile and ROM is non-volatile. That's enough to get a mark, meaning that data stored in RAM is lost when the power is turned off, while ROM retains its data. You can say that RAM can be read from and written to, while ROM is generally read-only. So a fairly straightforward question, and it's one where you need to ensure that you're getting those ones right, because these are the easy questions based on the build-up as we go through. You could also say that RAM has a much greater memory capacity than ROM, as RAM needs to hold the OS and all the applications being run, whereas ROM only holds data for some basic functions like the startup. Or you could say that RAM stores data that is currently in use, whereas ROM stores the boot up instructions for the system. So there's lots of ways you can get the marks on this question. So just make sure that you make your point and then explain the follow-up. So the next one, Brian's CPU has 64 kilobytes of level 1 cache memory and 1 megabyte of level 2 cache memory. State one difference other than size between the level 1 and the level 2 cache memory. So we can't reference anything that's already in the question. So here we just need to remember that level 1 cache is a bit like, if you imagine cache is like a pyramid. So at the top you have your smallest capacity but your fastest capacity. Then you go down to level 2, which gets a little bit slower, but the capacity increases, and then level 3 is where the size is much larger but the speed is very slow. So we can just really say that level 1 cache is faster than level 2 cache, and that will easily get us the mark. So level 1 cache memory is quicker than level 2 cache memory. Simple. So then E, describe how the arithmetic logic unit, the ALU, and the accumulator work together in the CPU. So here we can just say the ALU performs logical operations and calculations. That gives a mark, but then we need to follow up for the second mark to talk about the accumulator. So we can say, and the accumulator stores the intermediate results of those operations. So the ALU will do the calculations and comparisons, and then it will put the results into the accumulator. So F, when Brian finishes building his computer, he notices that it's quite slow, so he upgrades the CPU to one that is quad core. Explain why doubling the number of cores will not necessarily double the performance of the system. So this question is really just making sure you understand that some applications require the results from a previous step in order to carry it out. So therefore, it doesn't matter how many cores you've got, if you're still waiting for the data to arrive before you can execute and move to the next step, then it's not going to make any difference to performance. So not all applications are written for multi-core processors, and not all instructions can be executed because they rely on the result of a previous step. So you can say not all software supports multi-core processing. That's an easy first mark. Certain tasks cannot be split evenly between the cores. Other factors affect the system performance, such as clock speed, the cache size, the type, the amount of RAM. So it doesn't matter how fast your CPU is, if there's not enough space in RAM to store data temporarily, you're still going to have to wait for a space in RAM for the next thing to load. So therefore, it doesn't matter how fast your computer is at executing those instructions. If you've got too much open on your computer and RAM is full, it's going to go to virtual memory, which then going to slow the performance of your computer down as well. The amount of secondary storage as well, and the specifications of a dedicated GPU. So if you have a GPU, it's going to take away some of the processing of the images and video away from the CPU, so it can focus on main tasks, and that's going to improve the performance of your CPU in that way. So 2 says Gail manages the storage of data across different departments at a large university. She's considering replacing the magnetic hard disk drive on a number of servers with different types of storage. State 2 characteristics of storage devices that Gail should take into consideration before upgrading the server storage. So here you can talk about characteristics such as cost, capacity, durability, robustness, and read and write speeds. So here, any 2 of those will get you the mark. So price is a big one, and also the reliability of it as well, especially for servers. That's going to be really important. So Gail is considering cloud storage and magnetic tape as possible replacements. Compare the benefits and drawbacks of these 2 options for the university. So remember, magnetic tape is sequential, so it has to check every single item in a row in order to find the one you want. That's very good if the data is at the beginning of the magnetic tape, but it's not very good if it's at the end. So it's not very fast to find the information you want. Whereas cloud storage, you can access it anywhere you are as long as you have an internet connection, but it does cost money. So when you start to go above the free limit, you then have to pay considerable money. But then the online servers that host the data, they'll do a lot of the maintenance, and you won't have to buy the physical hardware for the actual business. So this question, so we say the university would not be able to access files kept in cloud storage if they lost their internet connection, while magnetic tape will always be accessible. If Gail wants quick access to individual files, cloud storage would be faster magnetic tape because tape uses sequential access, making it slow to find specific files. A cloud storage system would likely charge subscription, which would be more expensive, especially in the long term than magnetic tape, which is cheaper per gigabyte. Data kept in the cloud storage is vulnerable to hacking, while this is not a problem for magnetic tape. If there was a disaster such as a fire at the university, data stored in magnetic tape could be destroyed, while data in the cloud would be safe. So there's lots and lots of points you can go in order to get the marks there. So just keep in mind the fact that, you know, cloud storage is more expensive. You do need an internet connection in order to access the data, whereas magnetic tape isn't very fast in terms of being able to retrieve your data you want, but it is a lot cheaper, and it is, if there was a fire, you would lose it forever, whereas in the cloud, as long as you have an internet connection, you can access from anywhere, and it'll be safe from natural disasters. So the next question, C, a professor needs some experimental data from one of the university servers. He asks Gail to make 30 copies of the data, each on a separate storage device, so they can be handed out to students. The data is 5 gigabytes in size. Briefly explain whether each of the following storage devices would be suitable to store the data on. So we know that CDs, they have a capacity of about 700 megabytes, so they're not going to be very good. So that's out of the window straight away. USB pen drives, so they do come in storage capacities greater than 5 gigabytes, so they're good, and they're small, and they're portable, and they're fairly low cost as well, so they would be fairly suitable because you can give them out. External hard disk drives, they would have a capacity large enough for storing the 5 gigabytes, but they're a lot bigger than USB pen drives, aren't they? And they're probably more expensive as well. So the USB pen drive would be the place to go here. So in the exam, if you had a question like this, you just say CDs would not be suitable as they can only hold around 700 megabytes of data. Pen drives would be suitable as they are cheap, portable, fast, and store a suitable amount of data. External hard disks would be very expensive and excessive to store only 5 gigabytes of data on each one. So the pen drive is the way to go there. Question 3 says, Paula is the manager of Penfold and Penfold, a TAN agency which uses wireless LAN in their office. A, the computer system at Penfold and Penfold features various network related hardware. One of these pieces of hardware is a network interface controller. State why this piece of hardware is required. So all computing devices will have a network interface and card in order to allow you to connect to a network. So these can be a wireless one, or they can be a wired. If you have a wired one, it will be the little port on the back where your Ethernet cable goes into. If it's a wireless one, it's built into the device and you probably never see it. So all you have to write here is a network interface controller allows a device to connect to a network. Simple, one easy mark. B, state the piece of hardware that would be required to connect Penfold and Penfold to an external network. So if you imagine they're in their LAN, their local area network, and they need to connect to the WAN. In order to do that, they'll need a router, which is a simple one mark. Paula is considering changing the wireless network to a wired network. Explain one advantage and one disadvantage of changing to a wired network. So a wired network is going to give you faster transmission speeds than a wireless network, because wireless networks can have interference from magnetic waves, walls. The further away you get, they get weaker signal as well. But a wired network is going to cost a lot more money, because you will have to then buy switches, you'll then have to install cables, you might have to install some ports in the office so people can plug them in, all that kind of stuff. So you could say a wired network are generally faster than wireless networks, is one mark, as they have greater bandwidth and can transfer more data per second. Wired networks are more reliable than wireless networks because the signal quality is not affected by the factors like interference, distance from the switch or the WAN. Whereas the disadvantages are wireless networks are less flexible, convenient than wireless networks. For example, employees would no longer be able to easily connect to devices such as phones and tablets, be able to move between offices while still connected to the network for a wireless device. It will be expensive to change over to a wired network, as they would have to purchase new hardware, e.g. a wired switch, and a large amount of Ethernet cable. It would take a long time for the specialist IT staff to install the new cabling in all the offices. So D, the network set up at Penfold and Penfold is currently peer-to-peer. Describe 2 possible advantages of changing to a client-server network. So a peer-to-peer network is where to the computers, there's no central server. We don't store our data in one central location, and it's not managed centrally either. So peer-to-peer, everyone's in charge of their own machine, and then you connect to each machine in order to access files, which you then have to set up. And if one person goes offline, you lose access to their data and the files that are stored on their machine. Then you have to hope that someone else has it. If they don't, then you have to wait for them to come back online and so forth. Whereas with a client server network, you have a central storage device where all the data stored is managed centrally as well, and everyone can access it. You normally have a username and password, a bit like the school network. You have a username and password in order to access the school network, which then you access your files, you access the internet, you can access shared devices like printers and scanners and all that kind of stuff. So here, all we need to do is say peer-to-peer networks have no centralized management, whereas client-server networks would have a central server to deploy and manage security, backups and software. Peer-to-peer networks often create copies of files between devices, whereas client-server keep a single up-to-date file on the central server, which makes it easy to keep track of files as they are edited. On peer-to-peer networks, machines may slow down when other machines access them, while servers are designed to handle lots of traffic without slowing down. In a peer-to-peer network, when a user turns off their machine, the other network users lose access to any files on that machine, whereas servers are dedicated machines that are usually left on all the time. So there's lots of points you can make there, and hopefully you already know this information as well, which will put you in a good position in order to get the full marks. Penfold and Penfold have recently been the victims of a cyber attack. The company had previously installed tools to allow network forensics. Explain how carrying out network forensics will be a benefit to Penfold and Penfold. So network forensics is really about monitoring and recording activity on your network. So if something is out of the ordinary, you can quickly identify it, and maybe you need to take your service offline. Maybe you can investigate it nice and quickly. So really it's all about monitoring your network, and if something unusual happens, you can then react and make the changes. So what we'd write here: so the installed network forensic tools will have captured data packets entering the network during the attack. By analysing the captured data, the company can see how the network was attacked, identify weaknesses and resolve them to prevent similar attacks in the future. So 4, packet switching is a way of transferring data across a wide area network. The table below lists events that take place during the packet switching. Complete the table by numbering the events 1 to 6 to show the order in which the events occur. So the first one is the data is split into equal size packets. Then comes each packet is given an address, a number and an error checking data. 3, packets are sent across the network. Then routers direct individual packets across different paths. Packets are reordered based on their number, and then the data is displayed on the recipient's computer. So B, state one benefit of data being transmitted using packet switching. So packet switching is like in the previous question, where a file is broken down into individual packets and is sent across the internet. Some will take different routes in order to get there. So one of the advantages is splitting the data up allows the network to make efficient use of the many connections between the sender and the recipient, e.g. the data can be split up between different paths so that each half is transferred quickly. Each packet is sent along its own optimal route to avoid network traffic, meaning all the packets reach the destination quicker than sending the data as a single file. If parts of the data get lost in transit, the recipient can request specific missing packets, which is much quicker than sending the whole file again. So you can always think about packet switching as cars using sat-nav. So some of them will take different routes based on the traffic that already exists. So you could be a car stuck on a motorway, and then your GPS will make note that there's a traffic jam, and then someone 5 minutes down the road will then get redirected around a different path in order to get there quicker. So you'll arrive later because you're stuck in the traffic. So the routes that data packets travel will change every millisecond in order to optimize how quickly they get there. So number 5, it's estimated that globally over a third of all paid for software in use by both individuals and companies is pirated. Discuss the impact of the increased use of pirated software on society. In your answer, you might consider legal issues, ethical issues, cultural implications, and the impact on stakeholders. So stakeholders are the different groups of people that will be affected. So here they include software users, governments, software companies, and companies that run hosting websites. So there's lots and lots of points here, and there's lots and lots of marks available. So you can approach it where you could think about 2 marks per one. So you could do two points on legal, 2 on ethical, 2 on cultural, and 2 impact on the stakeholders. So if we look at the legal issues first. So the person illegally downloading the software is breaking the law, risking criminal prosecution for a piece of software. And the websites that host those files or provide the links to the files are at risk of prosecution as well, because they're allowing people to upload those files, which can then be downloaded. So they're basically allowing people to distribute copyrighted material. So software creators could pursue a legal case against the person downloading the software illegally or the website hosting the links to the software, and that comes under the Copyright Design and Patents Act 1988. So because of the international nature of the internet and varying worldwide copyright laws, it can be difficult to take legal action against people who pirate software. If strict copyright laws are introduced to prevent piracy, this could begin to affect jobs that rely on being able to use sections of copyright material such as journalism. So the ethical issues are, software is often expensive to buy, and that's predominantly why people do use pirated material software, because they can't afford to buy it. So some of these software suites such as Adobe Photoshop, Premiere, that they cost hundreds of pounds, and the kind of people that tend to do it are young people who don't have the money in order to buy it. So piracy could be seen as reducing the digital divide, so helping people who don't have enough money to buy it to be able to still use it, so still educate themselves, still give them the same opportunities, whereas people who have lots of money will tend to still buy it. Is that right or is that wrong? We don't, it's up to individual opinions, but it's against the law, it's against the law. So the more software that is downloaded illegally, the more money people are effectively stealing from software companies, limiting ability to produce more software and maintain their current software employee staff. So the idea there is the fact that if people don't buy it, there's no money going back into the business, which means they can't develop new products, they can't improve the product they're already producing, and it might lead to people having to lose their jobs because the companies don't make as much money as they were before. You can also mention governments may be pressured into devoting time, staff, budget resources into blocking websites that are distributed as software legally at the expense of other areas such as healthcare. So, websites like the Pirate Bay are blocked in the UK. Obviously, there are ways around it, but they're blocked to try and reduce the fact that people are downloading content illegally. And the idea is if you block the website, people can't access it, and therefore they shouldn't be able to see it, and therefore they'll be pushed more towards buying legitimate software. So if no action is taken against illegal downloads, this could endorse the attitude that it isn't a problem and encourage more people to commit the same crime. So if people get away with it, they'll just keep doing it, and they might tell other people, more people do it, and it has a knock-on effect. So the cultural implications: developers might be forced to add extra measures to their software to prevent discouraged piracy. So you might get digital rights management where you have to circumvent it in order to be able to copy it, which then adds an extra layer of protection which discourages people from doing it. If a country has relaxed copyright laws, it could be taken advantage of by people in countries with strict copyright laws. This might lead to pressure between governments to change their copyright legislation. If the software company decides to pursue legal action, this could lead to bad press, putting the company in a negative light. So if you took a company took lots and lots of people to court and then fined them, and they reflected really badly on the company, and then people might stop using their software, those who genuinely buy it, which then decrease your profits as a result. Companies could be forced to reduce the price of their software, thus affecting the salary they pay their employees, which in turn could affect the employee's standard of living. So you might reduce the price, which is beneficial to one group of people, but it affects the employees of the business. Society in general could overlook the legal aspects of this activity and almost ignore the fact that they are committing a crime. If paid-for software becomes easier to obtain for free, then Creative Commons open source software might become less popular, which could damage the online communities that support these types of projects. So if the software that people were previously paying for then becomes free, everyone's going to use the more well-tested and well-produced software rather than going for something which is free and is done by hobbyists, people who are really into it. They might give up making it, and therefore we lose the open source community and those people who enjoy doing it because no one's using their software anymore. The impact on stakeholders: so the person downloading the software could face prison, a fine, or a ban from using the internet. Governments could receive pressure from all parties to change the law in their favour, which could lead to unjust legislation. So it's not just legislation which benefits the end user, the people who are breaking the law. It could go the other way, and it could protect the companies even more, which then means the end user is put at disadvantage because they can no longer use it, and maybe they've been fined and it discourages everyone. So all have knock-on effects. Websites who host the links to legally obtained software could be blocked by ISPs, essentially stopping access to the websites, although this could receive bad press and be seen as censorship. So if you stop people being able to use the internet freely and access the information they want and the websites that they would like to, that's seen as censorship, and that has effect on the end user. But you could then argue that it does have a benefit for the software companies because their software is being protected because people can't access it illegally and therefore can't download it and use it without having to pay for it. So all these things have massive knock-on effects. So it might benefit one person, but it hinders another. You hinder one on one side and you benefit. So there's always two sides to every story. So here, 2 or 3 brief points with little explanation will get you 1 to 2 marks. 3 to 5 detailed points covering at least 2 of legal issues, ethical issues, cultural implications, and impact stakeholders gets you 3 to 5. 6 or more detailed points that form a well-written, balanced discussion covering all of legal, ethical, cultural, and impact on stakeholders. So having 2 points on each one would give you enough to get the 6 to 8 marks, which is what you want to aim for. So don't talk about just one area, talk about all 4 bullet points in the question, and that will stand you in good stead. So 6, Ruby is a software engineer for a small independent video game developer in Glasgow. The office is connected to another site in Sheffield via a virtual private network, or VPN. Describe what is meant by a virtual private network. So virtual private networks, it's not a real network. It's something you log on to. So it's software based, which then enables you to circumvent things like geolocation, and your data is encrypted. So companies use them to enable their employees to be able to log on to their networks and have the data that's encrypted. So a virtual private network is a network that is entirely software based, used to send data securely over a WAN of the internet. So lots of people use them in order to access things like Netflix in America, or if they live in America, they use it to watch BBC shows on iPlayer to pretend they're in the UK. And the idea is that for a business, when you log on to them, it encrypts all your data when you're sending it over the virtual private network. And then if it was intercepted, it would just be a jumbled up letters and numbers and symbols, and it wouldn't make any sense to anyone who has intercepted your data. So Ruby learns that DNS servers play a role in the internet communications. Describe the purpose of a DNS server in internet communication. So DNS servers translate a website's domain name into an IP address so that the web browser can access the web page resource. So always remember that behind every domain name is an IP address. So humans, we're better at remembering names than we are numbers. So therefore, we have website domain names rather than IP addresses, because if you had to type in an IP address every time you wanted to visit a website, you'd soon get frustrated and you'd have to remember lots and lots of IP addresses. So state which layer of the network protocol uses routers to direct data packets from Sheffield to the Glasgow office. So that is your network layer. The Sheffield office network uses star topology, whereas the Glasgow office network uses mesh topology. Describe 2 differences between the star and the mesh. So here on a star network, all devices are connected to a central switch or node, whereas on a mesh network, each device is connected to every other device, either directly or indirectly. On a star network, if the central connection goes offline, the entire network can fail, whereas a mesh network will reroute traffic via a different route, keeping the network online. On a star network, cable usage is relatively low, whereas a mesh network, a lot of cabling is required, potentially increasing the cost of setting up the network. So D, Ruby checks her email inbox on her desktop computer and finds that she has received an email from her manager. She later accesses her emails from the phone and deletes the email. When she checks her inbox on her desktop computer again later, the email has been deleted there. State the possible protocol that has handled Ruby's email in the scenario. So that's IMAP. So Internet Messaging Application Protocol. And then 7, Nick regularly receives suspicious looking emails claiming to be from his bank, charities and other organisations. These emails often contain attachments. State the name given to the practice of sending spoof mails. So that's your phishing, warm up. Explain how anti-malware software can help prevent malicious emails from attacking Nicky's computer. So antivirus software could scan all the incoming emails and attachments, so stopping it in its tracks before it can be executed. So obviously if you click an attachment, you're going to execute it and it's going to install the virus or the worm, and then it's going to cause problems. You can that will then automatically quarantine, delete any potential threats before they reach the user's inbox. A firewall could block emails from unknown suspicious senders, or you could say antivirus software can provide an "Are you sure?" warning before allowing the user to open attachments from unknown sources. And C, identify 3 types of malware that could target Nick's computer. So you can say virus, spyware, scareware, ransomware, worms, rootkeys, and trojans. They all come under the umbrella of malware. So 8, Joel uses his desktop computer to trade on various stock markets around the world for his clients. He also stores a lot of sensitive data on his computer. Joel wants to purchase a new operating system for his computer. State 2 security measures that an OS provide. So you can say data encryption, you can say user account control or access levels, password protection, pattern, PIN, fingerprint scanner, and retina scanner, all acceptable answers, firewalls, and automatic security updates. So 8b, Joel plugs a printer into his computer and is asked to install a driver. Explain why Joel will need this driver. So the driver basically allows the operating system to communicate with the hardware. If you don't have a driver, it doesn't know what to do with it. It doesn't know how to talk to it, basically. So drivers act as translators between the OS and the hardware. So Joel needs a driver in order for the printer to understand the data it is being sent and be able to print it correctly. So after regular use over several years, Joel noticed that his computer system takes a long time to open files from his desktop. He noticed that the hard disk drive appears to be making sounds more frequently. State the utility program Joel could use to potentially solve this problem. So this is where the disk defragmenter software comes in. It will look for all the fragments in the files and then bring them all together so they're close together and all the free spaces together as well, and that will then speed up your access times because the computer isn't having to look all through the hard drive in order to find the different fragments of the file, bring them together before it opens it up. So disk defragmentation utility is your first mark. Then the explanation is the utility will collect together all parts of the files that have been separated and reorganize them in an efficient way on the disk. This means that the read and write head in the hard disk drive can access files with less movement, increasing the drive's performance. So D, after completing a day of trading on the stock markets, Joel creates a detailed report for his clients. Joel uses a custom utility to manage these reports. At the end of each week, the utility creates a new file and copies all of the daily reports into it. The new file is then compressed. If the compressed file is under 5 megabytes, it's uploaded to the cloud storage and the daily report is deleted. If not, the compressed file is deleted and an error message is displayed. Write an algorithm to demonstrate the function of Joel's custom utility. So here we need to create a new file. We need to combine the individual ports into the file, compress the combined file, a condition statement based on the file size, uploading the compiled report and deleting the individual ports if the condition is met, displaying an error message, deleting the compiled report if the file is too large. So we can create a new file called weekly reports, and then 4k equals 1 to 5, which is going to run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Copy the report k to weekly report, so it's going to move the data into our file we've opened. Then it's going to iterate again until it gets to 5, and then it's going to compress it. And if the weekly report is less than 5 megabytes, then it's going to upload the weekly report to the cloud storage. Then 4n equals 1 to 5, so we're using a for loop, and we're going to iterate round, and it's going to delete the report n, and then else print error, file is too big, delete weekly report, and then we end our thing. Okay, so I hope that walkthrough of a practice paper has been useful. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.